On today's show, we have James Smits, the co-founder of Andrena. Andrena is beaming internet from rooftop to rooftops through cities. So this is a very cool concept. Welcome to the show, James. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me today.
You know, one of the most frustrating things for people is bad internet connectivity. And I am just so curious, how on earth did you guys come up with this idea? Basically, you guys are creating a mesh network, right? From building to building in cities. Talk to us more about that. What's the journey been like and how did you get to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you've identified a pain point that probably 99% of consumers in the United States have, and if not around the world, right? Everybody hates their internet provider. As a category, it's the most hated industry in the United States. I think it consistently has the lowest NPS scores across the board. So Andrena is born out of very similar frustration, right? Hating our ISP. At the same time, once you actually start to investigate what it's like to build an ISP from scratch, you realize that how the traditional players, the Verizon, Comcasts of the world, how they do it, it's a huge barrier to entry, right? It's very capital intensive. So you have to look towards alternatives. And, luckily in the last 10, 15 years, there's been this amazing wave of new wireless technology that permits you to kind of skip a lot of the initial capital expenditures, right? So traditionally, folks would use telephone poles or laid cable, but today we can just beam internet from rooftop to rooftop, which makes deployments a lot quicker. It also makes them less expensive, so we get that strong advantage and speed to market, which is as we all know, very important for a startup.
When people come up with ideas, I can appreciate something like I'm going to build a software tool, to help replace a spreadsheet. And here you are trying to build an ISP, and it sounds a bit like Elon Musk trying to, build spaceships and cars, right? So it sounds quite daunting.
It's true. Well, luckily we don't have to put anything into space, so we have that going for us. At least not yet, right? But I think it's interesting. So in my previous before Andrena, I worked in venture capital, and so I'm used to investing in SaaS startups, right? It's the bread and butter. These 85-90% gross margin businesses go from 0 to $1 million ARR in 6 to 12 months, and just go to the moon, right? But now, kind of as a co-founder of Andrena, what I'm really interested by, what really intrigued me from the onset, was how big of a problem it is, and also how challenging it is, right? So it's a test of our ability to execute. It's a test of our ability to navigate these waters. But if you can be successful, it is one of the largest markets in the United States, right? Not everyone, unfortunately, has internet in the United States, but we can still cover. Our eligible population is, let's call it 75% of the United States today. So
walk us through your journey then. How did you get to where you are, and talk to us a bit about your stint as a venture capitalist?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned before Andrena, I worked in venture. I worked at a couple seed stage, pre-seed funds, check size anywhere from, let's call it, 10,000 to 250,000, and investing in a broad range of sectors, both in the United States and elsewhere. So, got broad-based exposure there. Of course, what do you do when you start in venture? You judge a bunch of hackathons. And that's actually where I first met Neil, my co-founder. At the time I was just starting in venture, judging a bunch of hackathons, and Neil was still in school. He was the guy winning all of the hackathons. And then, Neil and I, our journey continued together. He actually ended up leaving school early, where we were both at Princeton together. He left school early to join one of my portfolio companies as VP engineering. And then when he left that company to found Andrena, I was actually the first investor in the business before then joining him very shortly after as his co-founder. So, Neil and I, at this point, have known each other now about a decade. Our CTO, Nick, who's also someone we know from Princeton, kind of Nick and I have known each other now almost 12 years. So kind of, long history together as a team. We've been working on Andrena now for, about 3 years or so. But that's kind of the journey that brought me to here.
At what point did you decide to make the jump and join Neil full time? Did you know as soon as you met this guy, he's a good engineer, or, he's winning these hackathons, I just need a technical co-founder because everyone apparently needs one if you're not a technical co-founder, right? Or was the idea fully developed and it was de-risked for you by the time you invested?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I'd known Neil was brilliant from the first time I met him. I don't think there's a hackathon I judged that he participated that he didn't win. And he was always
one of the judges.
Yes, I was. Yeah, I know. Perhaps I rigged the whole thing. It all comes to bear right now. It's this is the 60 minutes expose on it all, right? The seedy underbelly of hackathon judging. But no, from the onset I knew he was brilliant, and it was interesting. He was always participating in the hardware track of a hackathon. So, a lot of these large college hackathons, they have both the software and the hardware track. Neil, I think, just gravitates towards hard problems, and that's where he always found himself in the hardware track. So, kind of knew he was brilliant there, got exposure from him when he was working at one of my portfolio companies. And, when he came to us originally with the idea for Andrena, it's a really big swing. Immediately very intrigued. Our investment decision was a very quick one. And then, as I worked alongside Neil as a capacity as an investor, I realized just, he was a solo founder and he needed support, especially for something that was such a big swing. There's only so much that one can do in a day. So I think it kind of, it pretty logically followed from there to team up. It, wasn't necessarily, I had an idea looking for a technical co-founder. I'd say, Neil's the one who really came to the market first, really started exploring and tinkering with the wireless hardware. And then, kind of we really managed to formalize things together and then quickly raise a round after teaming up and, kind of off to the races from there.
Yeah, and disclosure here too, I was introduced to Andrena through one of the one of the investors, a 4.VC. The founder there, Anamitra, is someone I greatly respect. When I was a founder, I pitched him. He didn't invest, but we stayed close. Probably, his loss at that point. But I really respect him, and he invests in, even very early, pre-seed even, and just helps fund big ideas. So it does matter who your investors are, for sure. And, we don't usually bring on VCs on the podcast, even though it's called PropTech VC. We'll probably do more of that. Tell us some things from the inside. I mean, I'm a VC too, but, let's sort of have a bit of a brainstorm here around advice we can give to PropTech founders who are thinking about raising venture capital and lessons you've learned. Both perspectives, VC and founder.
Yeah, I'd say, it's interesting for a business like ours that could fall into, let's call it like a frontier tech category as well. I think, especially at the pre-seed, traction was less important. But, look, at the end of the day, we know as investors that traction trumps everything, right? The number one thing you can do to be successful in a fundraise is be growing like a rocket ship, right? Now, if that aside, what can you do for success, right? So I think, especially in PropTech, that's becoming a, more and more crowded space, continuing to look for that greenfield opportunity is important. Having a easy path on the go-to-market side is important as well. So really honing in on that. I think one of our advantages at Andrena is that we have a very smooth sales cycle. So closing a new property for us takes anywhere from a week to 3-4 months. But if you're in the many PropTech founders are coming with the perspective of charging the building, it's just going to slow down sales cycles there. So I think really having that solidified is important and showing that you understand that market. Because at the end of the day, I still think, look, there are lots of investors who focus on investing in PropTech. But if you're raising a pre-seed seed, probably the majority of folks you're pitching don't, they're not category specific. They might have some exposure from another investment or two and, looked at similar companies, but being able to help educate them is always going to be important, right? So helping them understand your space and that you know it well.
And the importance of finding the right team at the early stages is probably the biggest indicator. Later stage, it becomes a lot more about the distribution channel, the marketing, the engineering, everything else. At the beginning, you're betting on a person and their idea and their ability to execute. And that's lost on a lot of founders, especially at the pre-seed stage, tend to find that they'll bury the team slide at the very end of the deck.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And when you're investing that early, you're betting on horses, so for lack of a better phrase, right? That's ultimately the core of your investment decision is, do you believe that the team can out execute while understanding that they're going to go through either big pivots or micro pivots along the way. They're going to be competing against other folks. It's just the nature of the world, right? So in that competitive environment where they are going to be shifting what they do, can they continue to succeed? And, look, I commend Anna Mitra has been our, number one supporter since day one. Can't thank him enough for everything he did for us. But, I think what's remarkable about kind of their investment process is they invest in a lot of businesses, but they get to very solidified decisions quite quickly as well. So I think I got introduced to Anna Mitra through a mutual friend on a Wednesday, and we had a term sheet from them by Monday. Right. They knew it was a competitive round. They knew they had to act at that pace, but they still came to us with a fully fleshed out investment thesis as well. Right. So putting my founder boots on, I'm very impressed by that. Right. A, the speed of the decision. B, the efficacy in the kind of like fully formed decision-making process as well. I think a lot of people get caught up in hype cycles, right? It's like, Sequoia is taking a pitch with this company, and like, we gotta put a term sheet down, right? Building an investment thesis off of Sequoia's doing the deal will probably do well for you if you can get on the cap table. But in a world where Sequoia takes 100% of that investment, you need to figure out something other than that, right?